Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're going to take you on a bit of a journey with us that, you know, is very much not a roadmap. This is sort of the lens, this is our personal lens and our experience that we've gone through separately and how we kind of came together and ended up standing here in front of you now. But we've...
Which only happened 2 years ago.
Which only happened 2 years ago.
We're in it. We're in it.
And we've sort of framed it through the universal lens of fear, because I think that's something we can all relate to. Whoop, whoop, for scary things. So what we wanted to do was, just talk you through 10 things that are scary, taken from our list that's much, much longer. And connect them back to sort of our journey. First one is getting lost. So, like Ami mentioned, I think that most of the people in this room are creative people on some level or another, and you get into this business because you're driven by a passion to create. At a certain point, though, I think probably a lot of people in the room can relate. You start to not recognize the surroundings of where you are. You start to go, how did I get here? Is this where I want to be? Is this a safe place to be? Is this why I got out of bed in the morning? So if you ever feel like, or have ever felt like that passion sort of has vanished from the things that you were doing, or in other cases, sometimes the job itself has changed. Where the advertising industry, for example, has changed a lot from when I started to where it is now. So sometimes the job changes and your passions aren't being met in the same way. So for me personally, and I was working in advertising, so I had 15 years in advertising, starting as kind of a copywriter up to creative director. But really, I wanted to work in film, and advertising seemed like a really smart parallel career path, where you could be near big commercials and be part of big commercials and write them and oversee them. And that was the language of advertising when I started. It seemed to make sense, and it would run in parallel. And one day I'd leave and go be a film guy. And 15 years later, it was such an amazing job, and I met so many amazing people and did a lot of amazing things, but I felt unfulfilled and realized I needed to leave. And I think if you get to that point, and if it really is truly that personal feeling, and it's different for everybody, but if you realize you're at that point, that's the first step, is acknowledging, being honest with yourself that you might not be fulfilled in the way that you need. It's not just a blip. It is true. It is truly not feeding you the way that it needs to. And Leah's story was different than mine, but.
Yeah, my experience was almost the flip of that, whereas I had a job that I had sort of built and I was loving it and it was going great, and then I went on maternity leave and kind of felt like what I imagined maybe forced retirement might feel like. Like I sort of turned around for, what ultimately was kind of a short time and turned back and went, oh shit, my job's totally gone. Like it's gone and my department is gone. And so I had this sort of like come to Jesus sort of moment with myself where I was like, I'm ready to work again and want to work again. And, I hadn't thought about it at all through that time when I was turning around to do the maternity thing, because just want to be clear, I wanted to do that. That wasn't forced upon me. But I had 2 babies at the same time. So that added a little bit of pressure to that whole scene. So coming back and kind of going like, I thought I knew where I was, but that thing that I'd created had sort of disappeared. But for nobody's fault, it just did. So that moment for me was really like, okay, I need to be honest about where it is at and make a business decision to like recreate that somehow and get back into it. So that's what I'm trying to do. Okay, talking to strangers. So this at this point in the process is when you've kind of gone through the internal stuff, like Michael's feedback a little bit. The sort of internal struggle where you're kind of going like, is this real? Am I lost? Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing? And then start to externalize it. So this means that you're actually talking about it with people. And, most of us will go to people that we trust, so our closest friends and closest colleagues and family or whatever, which is great. Certainly do that. But we've also sort of noticed that if you're in an industry or in a tight team and you want to talk about jumping ship or making a change or whatever, you might not want to do that with that team. So getting outside of that industry a little bit to, take the temperature on your feelings and your idea. Maybe you have the sort of the kernel of an idea for what you want to do next, and just kind of start talking about that a lot out loud to other people. I had a little anecdotal story I wanted to tell about this friend of mine who worked in tech, and I won't say any more about them specifically, but they called me to come and have coffee with them, and we were in different industries completely almost, and she said to me that she wanted, I'm not going to use the actual thing that she did, but let's just say she made like knit hacky sacks, like hacky sacks, and so she had me for a coffee to tell me about the hacky sack idea. And she was like, I think I'm going to quit my job and like just sort of leave tech and, make knit hacky sacks. And like, I didn't know her well enough to be like, no, don't do it. Like, do not do it. Do not do it. That is such a bad idea. This is going to fail. But that's what I was thinking. And I think I just said like, cool. And now her knit hacky sacks are like all over the country and like going into the US, and she's created like an incredible business that makes like more than just knit hacky sacks. So the moral of that little story is just also like, don't listen to what people say to you, and do it anyway.
So you just sit on that one for a second. So I think, at this stage, you sort of have reflected and you're like, okay, maybe I'm not feeling it and I need to do something. And you start externalizing, you start talking to people. This is normally the stage you get where you're just like, a lot of people, it's this debilitating point where you start thinking about, we're using disappointed parents as a framing device, specifically disappointed Jason Bateman, because there's no one more disappointed than him. But at this point, this is the point when you start thinking about, failure, essentially. Failing in front of the people that you love, like your peer groups and your parents and your friends, just that idea, that nebulous idea of like, if I do a thing, it's gonna burn up and it's just gonna be like, it's gonna fail. And often the reason I think we do that is because it's nebulous. So, this exercise, or something we've talked about, was this idea of playing the worst case scenario game, where you actually when you start to name these things, when you start to actually go down the path, well, if this happens, well, what does that actually mean? Well, then that would happen. Well, what does that actually mean? Well, then this might happen. What does that actually mean? And if you go down that road, and at the very worst place you can get to is still not that bad, then maybe you're in better shape than you thought. And the people that you love are gonna stand by you, even if it does burn up. However, if you get to the very worst place and it's really bad, then that's also a sign. That if the worst case scenario ends really poorly, that's a sign too. So I think it's just a good exercise to play.
And also just know that like most people stop there. Like that's like such a debilitating barrier to making a big change in your career or starting something new or trying something different. So it's real, and like it's not, like it's something to really take some time with, because it is, scary. Making new friends. Michael put this slide in, and I like immediately had this like anxiety, like high school anxiety. I was just like, oh God, that hallway, just like, it's terrifying. Anybody else feel that? Look at that? Okay, thank God. Whew. Cool. So so this is sort of, especially for Michael and I, the point when you've talked to some strangers, which we both did in our, before we met each other. We were strangers to each other, but we decided to talk about this crazy idea together and see if we were going to be friends. So that was our experience, and so for you guys or for someone it's like thinking about, do I want to just be solo? Do I want a partner? Do I need to go and like try to find that partner in a haystack? Or is this something I can figure out within the team I'm already on, where I'm going to sort of realign myself with different people that challenge me or that I trust or whatever it is. So it can sort of happen in a lot of different ways. For Michael and I, we, despite being reasonably close in the industry, we had never worked together. So when we met, it was really like a year of sort of dating each other and like going to breakfasts and asking each other all the questions and trying to figure out, if our moral compasses were pointing in the same direction and what kind of work did we want to do, would we never do. We went to movies together because that's kind of like the industry that we're in. And I remember this one like indie film we went to at the film festival, and it was sort of over and the lights came on, and I kind of like I hated the movie. So I like looked at Michael and I was like, just like waiting for him to say what he was gonna say, and then he was like, yeah, I don't know, that was really bad. And I was like, oh, thank God, thank God. I was like, thank God you hated that too. And then we went to other movies where we were like, that was so awesome. And we were like, yes, okay, we both like the same movie. So we did a lot of that, and that's sort of an important still testing the waters step. The question we never asked each other was, what is your birthday? And because why does that matter at all? But as it turned out, we have the same birthday. Sure. And so when we've discovered that, we were like,
That clinched it.
And we were like, okay, let's do it. Let's launch this company. Anyway, yeah, that was our experience.
So at this point, it's the jumping off point. So you kind of have done this foundational work, whether it's, the internal work that you need to do to get to this point. At this point, you jump off, and that's amazing. And we sort of identified, everyone's at different stages, and this is, again, very personal to everyone in the room, if you're even thinking about this stuff. But we identified 3, I'm sure there's more, types of jumping offs in this case. So one would be this change from within, this idea that, you're working with what you've already built and adapting it to work better for you. So if you're a freelancer and 90% of your clients are you're doing work that you don't want to do, then you need to flip that number. If you're working at a company and you really actually believe in the company, but the kind of work on your desk is just not what you want, you can make change within that organization. It might be worth salvaging. Or if you built a company like Leah had, but the job had changed, how do you make it work in a new way? Which in this case was like spinning off a sister company. Which is what our company is. So that's one, which is working from within. The other one is the parallel jumps. So to me, that's like, what I did, jumping from advertising to production. You see a lot of people in advertising that jump from agency to brand side. So what it is there's like a shared Rolodex. There's a lot of actually commonalities between the industries. Even though you have limited advantage into both sides, there's still like a decent amount of groundwork. So I thought I knew a lot about production because I worked with production people, but actually jumping to the other side, there was still some stuff we brought over, but it was definitely a steep learning curve. And then the third one is the nuclear option. And this is when you leave your job in tech to start a hacky sack company. So that is very commendable and so terrifying. My wife, Emily, left advertising before I had left my job. She left advertising to start a hip bridal boutique with a partner that she found randomly. And I saw her do that, and I was floored at like A, how scary it was, and B, sort of blown away that how happy she was and how high and low the job can be. So I'd sort of hit like an autopilot to a certain degree of trucking along and still enjoying what I was doing, but seeing how intense that was and how brave that was a real fire for me. So those were the 3 that we identified. Moving on. 2.
Dun, dun, dun.
Uh-oh.
Not everyone feels this way about crowds, but what we mean here is, originally this slide was called, and I named this slide, and then Michael told me to change it. It was called "Feeling Old and Irrelevant in a." I'm not done. Feeling old and irrelevant in a crowded market of savvy influencers who always know what the cool shit is. And that was real fear, man. But yeah, but ultimately crowds and really like coming into an industry where you've kind of been gone for a bit is scary, or an industry that you've never been in before is also scary. And trying to essentially enter that with some curiosity and humility and try to find your white space within that is sort of what we aspire to do. And then also like hire those influencers and like bring them in. That's something I've learned sort of over the years, is like keep those smart people around you always. But yeah, for Kiddo, finding our white space was definitely something that we knew we needed to do. And because we felt that crowds were scary, we sort of went to a place where there wasn't much of a crowd, and hung our hat on the type of company that, certainly in this industry in Vancouver, a creative-based, creative roster-based production company. Thankfully, there's more happening, but there aren't that many. So that was sort of like our decision to occupy that space. And then once we got into that little corner that wasn't too crowded, try to really start telling our story within that, and making it personal, and making it about what we wanted to sort of change within that. And so, like, on that note, I wanted to share, like, if you are going to be the new kid in town, it gives you a really great position to go into an industry that maybe has some sort of calcified or archaic processes that are happening because they've just been done that way for a long time. Certainly our industry has that in spades, and being the new kid is a great position to be in, to come into those industries and change those things, or come in and say like, hey, why do you guys do it this way? Can we not do it this way anymore? Can we change that? So I think that it's difficult to do those things, but it's also, like, I believe an opportunity to do that. So we should all do that. Yeah.
Sorry. What's next? What scary thing is next? Oh, the dark. So you've jumped out there, you've defined your mission, you found your white space, whatever it is. You're like, okay, I'm going to do this new thing. And then suddenly you realize that you're not equipped, and you're back in the dark again. Your skill sets don't match your ambition. So I think this is a point where it's really important to just be patient with yourself, and give yourself the room to let your skills catch up to your taste. So I think, people talk about the taste gap. You guys are familiar with that expression, the idea that your taste is better than your skills, in other words. And it's like a 5-year gap on average to catch up to. What's good, but it takes a long time it takes at least 5 years to get to that point where you can create work that's to the level of your taste. And a lot of people give up at the beginning, especially young people, because they're like, I guess I'm not good at drawing. And then they stop, versus like grinding through. And that's, again, one thing advertising was good for is grinding you. But, I think it's important that you give yourself the space to be in the dark, but to push through. And one trick, I think, and again, this isn't this isn't rocket science, and I'm sure you guys have heard this lots of times, but the idea of goal setting in a very real way, 1 year and 5 year goals that are also way bigger than you think you can achieve. Shooting really high, because most likely you're not going to hit it, but you'll get farther than if you set these kind of mediocre, subpar, like just surviving goals. Set insane goals and then try to grind after it. Maybe you'll get there.
Do you remember this scene from Bridesmaids where she's sick, but then she gets offered like a candied almond, and then she's like, no, I'm hungry. I want to have this. You know what I'm talking about, girl. Come on. Anyway, saying no. She should have said no. Saying no is hard, certainly when you're working for yourself, or a small team or a small company, because you need to feed yourselves and you need to feed other people often. So it is certainly a hard thing. However, saying yes to that work that isn't the work that you want to do is the quickest way back to that job that you wanted to leave and that work that you wanted to leave. So continuing to say yes to it is how you're going to get back there super fast. And people will ask you to do that work because that's sort of what they remember you for, and especially if you were good at it, despite whether you liked it or not. So just remembering how important it is to choose the right things. And it is difficult to know how to do that, especially when you're trying to keep the lights on. So one thing I've learned through Giant Ant, and sort of Kiddo has adopted this, is to design just like a really easy filter to put those projects or those people through, but typically projects for us in the creative industry. And for us, it's just a three-step thing. So number one, would our moms be proud? Which is at the top of the list because it's the most important. Number two, is this a creative opportunity? And number three, is this a financial opportunity? And it has to be two of those. Otherwise, it's a no. So that's been, taken something that's sort of difficult to do and helped find a way to make that easier. So.
Missing out. Missing out. So stepping through doors inevitably means some will close. And I think that this is a point of frustration for a lot of people too, where if you do start to make a move in one direction, you need to make peace with the fact that there's going to be things happening always that you can't do now because you're doing this. And it's never been, more in our faces with social media and with everything else, where you're always seeing people that are farther ahead and are having more fun and are more whatever, seem more put together. Like it's a pretty debilitating time if you let it be, if you let it get to you. So I think it's this idea again of just like giving yourself space and being kind and letting those doors be closed. Deleting Instagram and just letting that stuff wash by you. There's no missing out. There was no wasted time. I think it's another thing is if you're mid-career or late career and you're thinking about doing something new, the idea that all that, you're like, oh, all that wasted time, like I'll be missing, that's like time I wasted. I really believe there's no wasted time. That stuff will come with you in ways you can't even imagine when you go and transfer to something else. So don't feel like you're missing out, because you're not.
Zombies. Yeah. Number 10, zombies. So this one is really about the world is going to shit and where apocalypse is imminent. So we should be working for and with good people as much as we can in the time that we still have. So I just can't stress that enough, because you make a decision to engage with people, you make a decision to hire people or take projects that represent certain things, and you should always put, working with good people that you respect above talent and above influence, and you will never regret that. And also, when shit does go down, you want to be with those good people probably on your team. So, I would say that's just something to remember always. Surround yourself with good people and partner with good people also that challenge you and respect you. Yeah.
No zombies.
No zombies.
And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
You said when you first started talking to one another, you got on the same page about what you'd never want to do. I'm curious what kind of stuff fell under that category for you.
Me? You? I mean...
Defense, oil and gas. Fast food's a real tricky one, but we have a big conversation about it first. And then we kind of decide that's a tricky one. It's like when you have so much influence in the thing that will go out and have influence, when you're creating that content, that's powerful, and it's sort of got to feel good to put something out there that's going to be very, not manipulative, but influential when you watch it for people. So those are the ones that come to mind, but and historically these are ones that sort of we've had conversations about, or Michael through his experience and my experience at Giant Ant that have come through, that you've kind of gone oh, that, and we would also, on the Giant Ant side, we would also talk to the team and not necessarily do a vote, but kind of if anyone was really opposed to the thing or the brand or the thing that we were going to be sort of selling by association, we would ask our team, and then we would say no if anyone was uncomfortable with that. So, and then the other thing that we have done is, if we weren't sure, we've done a little bit of research into that brand and kind of gone back a little bit to see, if they're good people and who they're owned by, and if those people are good people. Like, you can kind of do a little quick research to make those decisions. Does that answer your question? Do you want to add anything to that?
Maybe a little bit. So I think it's initially less about what we don't want to do and more about what we do. So being really clear about the kind of work that we're after. And then when other things come in, we're like, that's not what we're after. Let's discuss it. And that can be whether it's the sort of ethics of the brand, which can now be a discussion in a way that I never had that autonomy when I worked in corporate. So, I worked on McDonald's for years. That was my main client at Cossette. And, I had issues with it, but I worked on it. And, so I'm not like I'm a, ad saint. I'm not. But now we have an opportunity, to unpack stuff. And then beyond that, it's also just like, is it gonna build our company? Is it work we're gonna show? So then there's just like the logistics of that, where you're like, well, again, if it doesn't answer the kind of checklist that we talked about earlier, then it, that helps. It helps to have a guiding point.
Would you guys consider yourselves more of an ad agency or more of a production company? And how do you see Kiddo fitting in that balance?
Neither and both. We're a production company, first and foremost. We're a talent agency because we rep directors. And we're a creative agency because we creative direct, write, and direct concepts for brands. So we're all of these things and we're none of these things. And what we're not, though, is a full service agency. So we don't do anything except for video. So that helps to define lines. So, we'll have clients that have come to us that are like, okay, we want you to do an integrated campaign. And we're like, we don't do that stuff. Well, can you do our display ads? We're like, no. Like, can you build a website? We're like, don't know how. We just make videos. So we've just been very clear about that's not what we want to grow into. If we're going to expand our offering, it's going to be in narrative. So that would be the other divisions that we'd want to make, would be, editorial and narrative and stuff. We're going to start in commercial, and that's where we maybe want to go down the road. But I think there's something to be said for being a discipline specialist, just focusing on what you're really great at. Not a knock on the full service corner, but I think that's one game. And then the other game is being really clear and singular. And I think getting in the middle is kind of complicated. Kind of a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and you're constantly trying to be a generalist. It's exhausting. I hope that.
Maybe can I follow up on that? Just to kind of, I guess, expound on that. How do you feel, or how do you guys navigate the relationship between other agencies that might be representing brands that you also want to represent creatively? And so how do you ensure that your creative is coming forward if you're working in kind of like a complicated space?
We don't step on toes locally. I mean, we don't step on toes, but we certainly don't step on toes locally. So if, we have lots of friends that work at agencies, run agencies here that may have a piece of business, we would never go after that piece of business. Just wouldn't happen. So, we'll work directly with brands that don't work with agencies on a regular basis, or we look out of market. So it's just a respect thing.
Right, so you don't typically get hired by an agency, you guys are...
We mostly get hired by agencies. So we work with agencies and brands and try to do it in a way that isn't stepping on anyone's toes. It's a dance.
I actually have a good follow-up question to that too. When you guys talk about finding your white space, what was that conversation that led to the current model that you run out of your company? And maybe you could talk about that model first and then go into why you chose that model. Because you said that you took, again, a year to date each other and go through and then figure out on what you wanted to do. What were some of the conversations that led to that end goal?
Yeah, and I'll let Michael start this one, because coming from being an ECD at an agency, he was looking all the time at companies like Kiddo that were mostly in other cities, I suppose, different from me. So, yeah.
Sure. So, not wanting to talk too long, that's a big question, because what's interesting is, again, as so many media channels have evolved and full service agencies are trying to keep up with that, they've started building in-house divisions. So what they've, Lulu has like the biggest creative department in the city, and they're chopping on everything right now. Advertising agencies are bringing in editorial. Rethink does work directly with directors where they essentially scale their own production company per shoot. So agencies were making plays in every other space because they needed to, because it was too expensive to outsource. So on the flip side of that was I was seeing creatives noticing, especially over like in the UK, I saw it a number of times this was happening. Now it's happening more, but where you'd see sort of creative directors leaving agencies and going to production companies to essentially just focus on the video product, which has now become like a really necessary channel, highest engagement rate, all that marketing talk, which helps the case, right? So the idea of creating sort of a hybrid, video-focused consultancy, whatever, creative aid shop, I don't know what we are, whatever we are, was attractive. And the idea that we could do that with one foot in the traditional model, which is repping directors. So again, we have a roster of directors that we represent, but that we could still be creative people and take on the occasional project was really appealing. And I think that was it. It was just like, and I got very lucky by connecting with somebody that had a similar kind of interest, I guess. Did I sum it up properly?
Yeah, totally. And I think as far as like, coming up with the model, like you said, of what Kiddo was going to be, I think that also sort of cascaded out of that, where we wanted to access the kind of work that we knew was happening, and sort of branching out and having a roster of directors was one way to get into that play, I guess. But for me, coming from Giant Ant, like Giant Ant was sort of created not in a vacuum, but like my partner Jay and I had never worked in any other industries. We started that company kind of not knowing what like how the other ones worked ever. So we just built it up in that way. And so like we kind of adopted that with Kiddo, that we also always have worked with agencies and brands directly, and there's never been any problem with that. So we sort of could just invent the thing.
You did for a year, that conversation. Was that in the beginning, you're like, listen, I think we could start this company, let's talk for a year? Or like how finite were you about this decision on, and how did that go down? Or was it more organic where you're like, maybe we should just talk about this, and then when we feel ready, we'll start?
Yeah, we had a timeline because, mostly Michael was gainfully employed and I was still like, where'd my job go? I was working on some other stuff, but yeah, we did have a timeline because he needed to figure out how to exit the role and make sure that his team was going to be fine, and all of that was sort of in place. And so it was testing the waters, but it was also just that it took that time, I think, for us to kind of lay the track to then kind of come out and say what it was. So.
I would also say that I am very humbled to be able to partner with this one and her hubby Jay. These guys are phenomenal talents who built this thing in a vacuum, which again is even that much more impressive. Giant Ant is like if you don't know the company, look it up. They just do phenomenal, incredible, like some of the best animated brand work in the world. Here in Vancouver, like it's no big thing, I know it's a big thing. I know it was a big thing to get there, but it's, again, so it was, I think there was a fair amount of due diligence that these guys were doing to partner with an external force, was also in fairness, like deserved a long conversation, when they had done everything together. So, I think that was a big part of it too.
Why the name, and how did you decide on a name? Because that must be amazingly difficult.
That's also another reason why it took a year. Coming up with a name is so hard. I really had no idea because Giant Ant was like an accidental name, and then we were like, we should call this something, and then we couldn't change it because it had been around for too long. This was so intentional and such a different process where we were like, who are we? What does the name mean? What does it say about us? And also the other thing is that there's a lot of production companies in the world that are like actively making work. So there's a lot of names that are really rad and are already taken. Like we went through several, and I remember in the process that we'd get on one and we were like, this feels good. This feels good. I've never heard of any, and you'd look it up and it'd be like a company in London who's like doing like sick commercials and like doing like lots, and we're just like, damn it. So so it was hard to get to one that we both loved, but also the process of like, what does it mean? And, we wanted to have a name that spoke to youthful energy and also just friendliness and likability, and a name that was sort of approachable as well and fun. Because we being kind of a mid-career decision to do this company, it needs to be fun for us. So we wanted to make sure that was something that the name said. And also just finding a name that you can say out loud. I remember this friend of mine said, you have to test out the name that you're going to call your child by shouting it across a park. And that's a good way to figure out if it sounds good when you say it like that. So just kind of saying it out loud a lot. And then I guess sort of coming up with something that sort of jived with Giant Ant, because we are sister companies and we wanted to, we had to think about all the names. We have a triplet company as well called Playdate, which is the music and sound company. And so, just envisioning those on a door too.
And we're also all parents with young kids, and I think that was another sort of point. Was that's a driving force as well, and so that was also part of it. Was just that's why we're getting up in the morning. A big part of it. It's our kids.
Michael, I know I said final question, but I'm still going to take the final question. You and I spoke before, we put this talk together, and you talked about this framework that you had for evaluating your work.
The 60% rule.
Can we walk through that a little bit?
Sure. I don't know if this is a good rule or a bad rule, and I don't know where I got it from. Maybe I heard it and co-opted it, likely. But the idea that sort of my metric of job happiness for a lot of years was the 60% rule, where I was like, if I'm happy on average 60% of the time at my job, that's pretty good numbers, considering it's a job. The name is job, right? It's called a job. So if you're happy 60%, obviously that you'd have higher days and lower days, but if it evens out to around 60%, that's pretty good. And I think that it was a little bit like when I had, a year of kind of the mid 40s or whatever, when everything was going really well, that was a signifier for me that it was nah, this just isn't, there's no way you can't rationalize yourself out of it. You can't rationalize your way out of it when you realize it's just not happening. So in retrospect though, now I'm operating at 97s and 4s. So the highs and lows are way more stressful. So the 60s I reflect on with sort of kind memories, at how I was that was a casual 60. And now everything is just live or die at every second. Anyway, does that answer it?
Can I
yeah,
add something
yeah, of
to
course.
that? Our first job together was this. It was for an insurance company, and we were going to shoot it in LA. Never done that before, with a director we didn't know, because he was new and we were new, and everything went wrong, and the union came and showed up at the set. We had to pay them off. I almost didn't make it through the border. I got in big trouble. We got in a fight with the director's other agent, and it just kind of everything possible went wrong. And I remember this moment where Michael was just oh man, this one is a hard one to start on. And in my head I was going, they're kind of all like this. Should I tell him? It's true. Should I tell him that this is normal? It's true.
That's amazing. Round of applause, guys.
Thank you.
You have it still? There it is. Awesome. Thank you. All right, guys. So one of the fundamental principles of Creative Pulse, we want you to think about how this information, this story, this conversation is going to reflect back into your life. How are you going to take action from something you heard here tonight? What's one small or large thing that you can do? Because if any of this story resonates and you are feeling a little bit stuck, living a creative life on the sunk cost fallacy is a ridiculous way to go, right? Just because you've sunk a lot of time or money or information in, that's not enough. You have to push yourself, right? So these guys have very little kids. And I, as a parent myself, just reflecting on the journey, just on that one variable, it's huge. The stakes are high, but it doesn't mean you don't live. Don't turn into a zombie, basically. One last round of applause for our wonderful